Thank you for joining us on this latest episode of Steaming Along the Line. This episode is focused on a locomotive that's considered one of the most beautiful ever and the most photographed in the world. That locomotive is Southern Pacific Daylight number 4449. Today we're going to talk about the history of the 4449 from its in-service days to its restoration for the American Freedom Train, and then how it's developed into one of the most popular excursion engines of all time. We also have had the opportunity to speak with a member of the legendary 4449 crew, and he's going to give us some of his insights of how he got involved, his favorite trips with the locomotive, the transition from the Brooklyn Roundhouse to the Oregon Rail Heritage Foundation, and also what the current status of the Daylight is and its future operations. The 4449 was built in 1941 by the Lima Locomotive Works in Lima, Ohio for the Southern Pacific Railroad. It's classified as a GS4 Northern type locomotive with a 484 wheel arrangement. She is 110 feet long, 10 feet wide, and 16 feet tall. The locomotive and tender weighs 433 tons, and it operates with a boiler pressure of 300 psi. Her 80-inch diameter drivers and unique booster truck can apply 5,500 horsepower to the rails and exceed 100 miles per hour. With its streamlined Art Deco appearance and red and orange daylight paint scheme, the 4449 was placed into service on May 30th, 1941, and spent its entire career assigned to the Coast Daylight, Southern Pacific's premier passenger train between San Francisco and Los Angeles, California. After the arrival of newer GS4s and GS5s, 4449 was assigned to the Golden State Route and Sunset Route passenger trains. It was then reassigned to the Coast Division in the early 1950s. In 1955, after being one of the last few locomotives still in the Daylight livery, 4449 was painted black and silver and its side skirting removed due to dieselization of the Coast Daylight of January that year. 4449 was then assigned to the Southern Pacific's San Joaquin Valley line, occasionally pulling passenger trains such as the San Joaquin Daylight between Oakland and Bakersfield, as well as fast freight and helper service. The engine was semi-retired from service on September 24, 1956, and was kept as an emergency backup locomotive until it was officially retired on October 2, 1957. It was then placed in storage along with several other GS-class locomotives near Southern Pacific's Bakersfield Roundhouse. In 1958, when most of the GS-class engines had already been scrapped, the 4449 was removed from storage and donated to the city of Portland, Oregon, on April 24, 1958, where it was placed on outdoor display in Oaks Park. Since the equipment was considered obsolete, 4449 was not actively chosen for static display. It was picked simply because it was the first in the deadline and could be removed very easy. During its time on display at Oaks Park, the 4449 was repeatedly vandalized and had many of its parts stolen. Its condition quickly deteriorated due to neglect as well. However, a Northwest Rail fan named Jack Holst kept the 4449's axles and rods greased to help prevent rusting while it was still on display. This undoubtedly helped the 4449 become a candidate for its operational restoration, which would come a few years later. In the early 1970s, Ross Rowland, a young, successful New York commodities broker, an occasional steam locomotive fan, had the idea to celebrate the bicentennial of the American Revolution with a traveling exhibition of unique and representative artifacts from the 200-year history of the nation. This idea transformed into the American Freedom Train. The American Freedom Train concept was to be a steam-powered bicentennial celebration exhibition train that would travel all over the United States and let people come tour it to see items of Americana history that helped build our nation. Many steam locomotives were looked at to be the motive power for the American Freedom Train, including a pair of nickel plate road Berkshires, a pair of Pennsylvania K4 Pacifics, and even Norfolk and Western Class J 611. But it was ultimately the 4449 that was chosen due to its size, power, and graceful lines. However, some clearance issues were brought up in the eastern portion of the American Freedom Train, so a Reading T1 number 2101 was chosen out of a scrapyard in Baltimore, Maryland, and rebuilt to pull the eastern part of the Freedom Train. And also in Texas, Texas and Pacific 210-4, number 610 was restored to pull the Freedom Train for a few days as it went through the state of Texas. On December 14, 1974, the 4449 was pulled from Oaks Park to the Burlington Northern Roundhouse on Hoyt Street, and restoration began. Out east, the American Freedom Train was ready to go, and 2101, now numbered American Freedom Train number 1, was on the point on March 28, 1975, and the Freedom Train began its 2-year journey. A few weeks later in Portland, on April 21st, the 4449 was steamed up for the first time, and then test runs were conducted on May 9th and 12th. On June 20th, the 4449 departed Portland for Chicago, Illinois, where it would take over as the main motive power for the American Freedom Train. In a ceremony on August 4th, the 4449 and number 1 officially swapped, and the 4449 took charge of the Freedom Train. The American Freedom Train finished up its tour on January 31st, 1976 in Miami, Florida. The locomotive had to get back to Portland, Oregon, so it pulled an excursion train sponsored by Amtrak that took it from Miami back to Portland, Oregon. When it arrived in Portland, it went into storage facing an uncertain future. The engine sat in Portland for a few years until its calling as an excursion engine came. 1981 proved to be a historic year for the 4449 as she was restored to her original daylight colors for the first rail fair at the grand opening of the California State Railroad Museum in Sacramento, California. In 1984, the 4449 pulled an all-daylight painted train from Portland to New Orleans, Louisiana, and back to publicize the 1984 World's Fair. This 7,477-mile round trip was the longest steam train excursion in U.S. history. In 1986, the Daylight became a Hollywood movie star when she appeared in the movie Tough Guys starring Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas. After her starring role in the movie, she pulled many excursions throughout the rest of the 80s and 90s, but in 2000, a new calling came for her. The locomotive was selected to pull the Employee Appreciation Specials for Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway. Seeing as the Southern Pacific was not a predecessor of BNSF, the locomotive was painted black and silver for these trips. In 2002, after the events of the September 11th terrorist attacks, the 4449 was repainted into its American Freedom Train red, white, and blue colors. After the Freedom Train paint scheme, the locomotive was returned to its daylight colors once again, this time in its as-delivered appearance with the small Southern Pacific lines on the tender. In 2009, the 4449 made another cross-country venture, this time to Owasso, Michigan, to take part in Train Festival 2009. While at the event, she was reunited with her Lima sisters, Nickel Plate Road 765 and Pere Marquette 1225. After Train Festival, the locomotive powered many public excursions and was the motive power for many Holiday Express trains for the Oregon Rail Heritage Foundation. Her last mainline outing was in 2018 as she played a starring role in the Stephen Lowe IMAX film Train Time. Today you can find her on exhibit at the Oregon Rail Heritage Foundation in Portland, Oregon. On a recent trip to Portland, we had the honor of sitting down with one of the longtime crew members and president of the Friends of the 4449, Pat Tracy. Pat was gracious enough to talk with us about his involvement with steam, the 4449, his history with it, the future of the locomotive, and of the Friends of the 4449. We hope you enjoy this interview with Pat, and let's get started. Can you give us your background and what got you into the steam business, Pat?
So, grew up in a railroad family. My dad was an engineer. My uncle was an engineer. My grandfather worked in track maintenance for Great Northern, and he started out in Union Pacific in the 1920s out of Council Bluffs. And at the point that my dad and his siblings were born, they were at Havre, Montana, working for Great Northern. So my uncle, my aunt, my dad were all kids that were born at Havre. And about 1940, my grandfather had been injured on the job, so he was medically retired. And at that point, they moved the family out to Portland. And in the rail industry, obviously at that time, there were a lot of people that worked railroads. So when they got here, lo and behold, he had two young guys in the house, both my dad and my uncle, that needed out of high school to get into a job. Well, They ended up going to work for Northern Pacific Terminal Company, which was the terminal railroad in Portland. And NPTC, as it was called, handled passenger duties at Union Station and freight duties in East Portland. They had a roundhouse out at what we call today as Giles Lake Yard. And as a kid, I grew up in railroading around conversations that during the holidays, I'd always say that at Christmas, if my grandfather, my uncle, and my dad were actually talking about railroads, and understand that they weren't rail fans, right? It was a job at that time, but to them, there was a demarcation between the railroads under steam and the railroads that we have today in the diesel era, the modern railroading. So with that, stories that would occur in the early to mid 60s about railroading all centered around steam engines, all right, and experiences. And I thought, well, that's cool, but I'll never see it, right? And as a family, we would, we would go down and deliver lunch to my dad down at Giles Lake Yard. And that was one of the reasons he worked for Northern Pacific Terminal, or what became Portland Terminal Railroad, was because it was a job that he would leave home in the morning, and he had a family, and he could be home at night. Now, during World War II, he did work. Everybody in World War II just did plain work, right? There was cubic work for everybody at that time, and they just knuckled in and did that stuff. But the terminal railroad was busy enough. If you were in a pool on the railroad, you were living away from home. Well, he found himself on numerous occasions during World War II having to, if they were short, they had lost a crew member for illness, fireman, that he fired, would occasionally fire north out of Giles Lake just to pick up for a crew member that they lost down here. So, in Northern Pacific, obviously, all the railroad scene was much different at that era. At Portland Union Station, you would have had Union Pacific, Northern Pacific, Southern Pacific, Spokane, Portland, and Seattle, all in Great Northern, all delivering. They all had passenger trains in and out of Portland. The Portland to Seattle trains, it was a unique deal. They called them pool trains, all right? And each railroad, they finally settled on saying each railroad's going to end up having one of the departures. So they had a morning, afternoon, evening departure. And so you had all these railroads that were in and out of Portland. Northern Pacific's steam power generally got service at Giles Lake.
Okay.
All right. And, the rest of the railroads here in the vicinity, UPs went over to Albina Roundhouse. Southern Pacific went to Brooklyn Roundhouse. And Great Northern, I think the Great Northern equipment was handled at Giles Lake, now come to think of it, because naturally there was a steam story about they had to turn power. And the turntable at Giles Lake was too short for a Great Northern P2 mountain, so they'd have to take it around the balloon track. So I do know that they service GM Power there too. But the business really started as a family stories. Never expected to ever see it, because I was born in 1955. You at that point, as a kid in the mid 60s, steam was long gone, right?
Yep.
Interesting part of that is those lunch deliveries down to Giles Lake. There were 2 steam locomotives at Giles Lake on one of the storage tracks near the roundhouse, One of them was the Mount Emily #1 Shay, and the other one was NPT number 16, which was their last 060, and which was a cool locomotive. If you come to my house, you'll see there's at least a couple of pictures of the 16, right? And it was when you look at preservation today and everything that's in the engine house here at Portland, you look at it and you say all those lucky locomotives that made it away from the scrapper storage. The 16, the Mount Emily, ended up going away the Oregon Historical Society, and left the 16 with no place to go, and the company had asked to they had tried to market it out there to give it to an entity, and nobody wanted it. So at some point in there in the mid 60s, they sent it to Schnitzer Steel and had it scrapped. But and all of that was a teaching moment. I looked at it and I'm going, if you were a kid in that era, you go, we'll never get to see this stuff run. Won't happen. So I got to it, and those stories left it in your blood, and you never thought you'd get to witness most of that. So along come the 70s, and the Freedom Train Foundation came in to pull they decided that the 49 was going to come out of Oaks Park. Now, as a kid, I'd been to Oaks Park plenty, and Oaks, as far as the machines were concerned, it was not pretty. All right, they were heavily vandalized even at that time, and thank God they weren't graffitiing the everything at that time. But anything that could be broken in the cab was broken. Right? They weren't. It was just not acceptable. So when the Freedom Train Foundation decided 49 was going to come out of the park, it was, I looked at that and I'm going, well, that's pretty cool, but had no way of knowing how to get involved. I was deep in the Air Force at that point, and the Air National Guard at the Portland Air Base, and I really didn't see an avenue on how that worked yet. Didn't have that in. Had a friend of mine that was involved with the National Railway Historical Society chapter, the PNWC here in Portland, and he said, they became the caretakers after the engine came back to Portland, and that was my in the door arrival piece, that I came into that organization and got involved the first time that they'd returned the engine at the end of the Freedom Train. They had the transcontinental trip across the country with to return the 49 back to Portland, and that was an Amtrak trip. And it got back here. They had no place to put the engine at that point, and Union Pacific gave them the okay to take it over to Albina Yard, and UP stored it in what was called the Albina Freight House at that time. And the freight house was not really a place you could work on the engine. It was this track it was covered track is about what it was with, and I don't think we ever figured out how to turn the lights on over there. So we had to haul it out of the freight house, and I got involved on a cleanup day for a national, I guess it was Transportation Day exhibit on Swan Island. So the chapter had a big work party for that, went out and got involved. That was 1978. And from that point, 78, it's like overnight that what would transpire over the next couple of years was really going to be the daylight's future beyond the Freedom Train. And what that was California State Railroad Museum. And CSRM grand opening in 1981, and they wanted the 49 down at Sacramento because it was a daylight locomotive. I imagine that, a daylight locomotive in California, synonymous.
Yeah,
You know,
pretty fitting.
pretty fitting. We have to rub that into CSRM that yeah, it's up here in Portland. But, so the pressure was on to find a place to get the work done that it needed to get it out on the road. So back in '77, in 1980, but I think it would have been timing wise. I think we ended up over at Brooklyn with the engine late in '80, and Southern Pacific at that time, said you can use a stall in the Brooklyn Roundhouse. So it came out of Albina, and they got it in over at Brooklyn, and went to work on getting it ready. And that was, it was in Freedom Train colors. It had to be painted in the daylight for the first time. From that stage at Brooklyn, that was really the onset of its next career.
Okay, so what roles with the 49 organization have you held, or do you currently hold, or what's your involvement or past involvement with the whole operation?
So when you look at the 49 today, and then look back, my view of this is when we started, there was Doyle, and then there was everybody else, right? So we all worked for Mac, and there wasn't a president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, all of that, and that didn't exist. We were a crew, so and that was the function to begin with. And how you rose in the crew was, if you were you tried to be good at what you did, and you paid attention, and you learned, and you just worked. Maybe that's the biggest key. If you're, the people that last the longest work and don't quit, right? And I didn't, my career in the military, I never knew how to, that's why I went almost 42 years. So, naturally with the daylight, I've not figured out how that worked either, so I'm still here. I'm still working. The Friends of SP 4449 came about, that would have been the 10th anniversary at CSRM, the California State Railroad Museum. We went down there, and lo and behold, we have concessions. Well, you would just, everybody go, we sold T-shirts in 1965. Somebody would tell you that. But, concessions developed big time, at least for most of the rail operations that came about in the 90s. And when I say that, we went down the CSRM, and we had stock. We had a couple of the guys. George Lavico, who's here today. George was in charge of concessions at that time, and so things had changed. It had gone from there's only Doyle, and there's the rest of us. Now there's Doyle and George and the rest of us, because with George there in concessions, everybody was going to work concessions too. So you got another job, and we came in fairly well prepared. When I say fairly, we thought we were golden, right? And we hit that 10th anniversary down there with stock and the ability, set up the table and the display and the whole 9 yards, just like everybody else. But we had more stuff than almost anybody. And better yet, down there in that environment, it was somebody turned the vacuum on, and stuff was just leaving. And you go, well, where's this going with the Friends? Well, we suddenly found now you had a steam crew that knew nothing about concessions to speak of, and we ended up with, there was money coming in, and it was like, in anybody's wildest expectations, did you think you were going to have to load thousands of dollars in your pocket to get it back over to the Holiday Inn at night? And as to, it came about that, that might not be a great idea to be doing that like that. So, we have to get real here about how this is going to work. And set up a nonprofit, and we learned. So what happened with that is the nonprofit became Friends of SB 4449, and that was the financial arm of what it took to run a big 484. And now we got into a president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and so you ended up having to set up a real board for this operation. Now, the Friends today, it exists as just that, but it's board only. It's a non-membership group, so we don't charge dues. And if you roll in and you call yourself a daylight person, then you're basically hired, right? That's the way that works. And, we aren't sending out dues. But from the board nonprofit piece, that is the way that we had to be real about handling demand for concessions. Now, almost everybody, when we were down there, there were a lot of other organizations that said, man, you guys really have your act together here. I could have said something else, but the idea was that, it was like, wow, we're really successful, but we weren't really planning this, and we see how we can get better.
Yeah. And
that's really where that came from. And so did I call myself a member of the Friends? Yes, I did. As far as getting on the board, I've been a board member on over the years, but I can't give you a date. It would have been probably sometime in the 2000s, late 90s, 2000s, somewhere in there. And today, I've been president now since 2018.
Okay.
And you go, well, what does that mean? Well, management of the locomotive and the Friends assets. And almost everyone looks at us and goes, well, does Doyle own all this? And we know he doesn't own the locomotive. That belongs to the city of Portland, right? But the cars, all the cars that were accumulated here, which I can tell you as a nonprofit organization that we probably have more cars than anybody should have, because trying to take care of all this stuff is an issue. But so the Friends' existence today is, are we still doing concessions? Yes. Are we getting road trips? No. Until something changes that you can get out in the main line and do what we were doing, which, that'll probably come at some point. When there's a demand, there's a way, right? And in the meantime, at ORHF, Oregon Rail Heritage Foundation, all this equipment is here, and you look at it and you go, who owns what? Well, I'd have to walk you down next to every car and say, who owns what is, the majority of the cars here are owned by the Friends. So what we've got as far as what the locomotive built, a lot of it that you see, you're sitting in I think this is the last SP round in left in existence. And it was rebuilt at Brooklyn. We got it out of a scrapyard in California, and there were 3 cars total that made it up here out of the scrapyard. This was one of them. But so this is a friend's car now. Looking across at the little boy, which was the steam heater car, which I tell people it's your big steam locomotive auxiliary APU, auxiliary power unit, and then everything else is a purchase beyond that. But from the board perspective, it's probably confusing for a lot of people. You go, well, you got the Friends, and then you have ORHF.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, the hierarchy here is Oregon Rail Heritage is basically the plant, the building, the footprint, right? The city owns the locomotives, and basically they entrust ORHF to be responsible for the engines. So ORHF is really holds the overall responsibility on all 3 of the locomotives. I have 4 of them now, if you include the Mount Emily. Mm-hmm. And the equipment at that point is different ownership in regard to the individual groups. So the SPNS 700, they have the 105 car here, so they've got 1 car, and the Pacific Northwest chapter NRHS has 6,800, 6,200 Mount Hood are all here on property. And that has been the consist that basically drives the museum. Mm-hmm. So you and I sitting here, you know that in order to make this museum function here, we're sitting in the vehicles that basically have driven every Holiday Express for as long as I can remember. I think I should have been prepared and had my number on my palm of my hand here about how many years we've done this. But Holiday Express drove the facility. Mm-hmm. So
and that's one thing I've learned, and I think a lot of the rail fan community do not get, and I think you hit on it perfect. It's not just running a locomotive. It's everyone that's involved with a locomotive is not just a wrench turner. There's people that sell concessions. There's people that fundraise. There's people that work on the cars. It's all about putting the team together and making one successful operation, and I think you all have done an excellent job out here with that.
We're trying. We're trying, and it's good having you here for more than just one day, just because you've got a feel for the place, all right? So, I mean, you walked in here this morning. When I say walked, you drove in. You drove in the gate this morning. Things were happening here, right?
Yep.
So, we're throwing a cab on a Pacific, just, for the hell of it. Got a crane on site. We got dump trucks coming and going. It's, there's, it's a lot. You could look at this place and you guys see one problem for them. And they need all you volunteers need to be full-time staff. And none of us want to be, the whole idea of, when I retired, it wasn't to see if I could get another 7-day-a-week job. And steam engines are 7 days a week, so.
Yes, they are. So what's it like working on one of the most famous locomotives in the world, the Daylight? I mean, it's an iconic engine. Everyone knows it. What's it like? I'm sure there's personal gratification from doing that, and just what's your take on working on it?
The Daylight is one of a kind in, when I say that there were a lot of big steam engines out there, and now, somebody would say, well, why did you pick? I didn't necessarily pick the Daylight as being my ticket into the next 40 years. When I did that, it became involvement. On a personal basis, I kind of, the streamline power, I was really more used to the standard steam locomotive look on most steamers, mm-hmm. right? in streamlined locomotives were not that common, right? And some of my initial work, I actually worked on 700 with a couple other guys, and it was still in the park. And I liked the looks of the locomotive, and it had a history here. But the 49 was a force all into itself. And when I got taken in by the crew, and if you either were asked to come back or you weren't, right? So, so you would have looked in the 80s. I had free time. I was at Brooklyn working, and with that, as responsibility came up in the crew, and you got, next thing you know, you did service work, and first firing stint that I ever did was, I think it would have been 1986 out of Lakehead, California, heading north. And George was, I was the student, George was the instructor, fireman for that act. And I, once I got in the firing seat, I never looked back in regard, that became a passion. But it's not just about firing. Some people say, "Oh, how you want to run?" I said, "I've got a mainline engineer here.
Yeah,
I'm comfortable with I am real comfortable with wanting to do a great job in the firing seat, and I made that my passion. And if you fire, you better know the locomotive. Well, you spend if you go compare how many hours you get firing to how many hours you do maintaining, right? So you work, and without any heat in the firebox at all, and then occasionally you get to fire it up. But the 49 is what it did with me is, as every year went by, it was part of the family, right? When I look at it, I don't look at it and say it's my locomotive. If anybody could say that, Doyle would be able to say that. But for me, do I love it? Absolutely. Is it every steam locomotive that you can see today is beautiful and should be paid attention to. I don't go out and get into these Ford truck, Chevy truck, Dodge truck conversations with guys about what's the best. It's like, if it's running, it's pretty damn good, and that you ought to be happy with that. And run it well, right?
Absolutely.
So, and in Doyle's crew, that was the whole thing. We were pretty tight-knit, small operation in regard to crew, and the issue there was, if you're doing it, you better do it well, and that meant everything. So, and that's just what we did. I joke a lot about the fact that none of us golf, and most of us like to fish, but normally never get to. So where's all your time going? My wife could tell you that.
I can relate.
Anyway.
So in all your time you've had with the 49, obviously you all have ran a lot of trips, and there's a lot of memories. Do you have any certain trips or memories that stand out that you'd like to share with us? When I read that question, and that was a tough one, because almost every trip is, when you get out, you better appreciate everyone. All right. There are some things that stand out. Give you a couple stories. One in particular was not a big trip, not going very far, but I'm out at the Portland Air Base, and the phone rings, and I think at that time it wasn't my cell phone. It was I got it through the regular landline, and it's Doyle, and he said, "Hey, Sarge," he said, "what are you doing?" I said, "I'm working, Mac." It's like a Wednesday,
right? He said, well, he said, what are you doing tomorrow? I said, well, I was probably coming to work tomorrow. Well, you got something that I should know? He said, well, we got to get the 49 down to Salem, down to the fairgrounds. I'm going, oh, okay. And, you know, when are we gonna do that? And he said, well, I was thinking tomorrow. I'm going, you know, I'm doing the math in my head. I'm standing out in the base operations, and when he says that, and I'm going, you want to leave tomorrow morning? Right? You know, it's like, sure. You know, you got a cold 484 at the Brooklyn Roundhouse, and that means that I gotta leave, get out of the base, head to Brooklyn. Don't turn left, don't turn right. Head straight to the Roundhouse. We got to get water in it, and then we got to get the little boy putting steam in, and then we, you know, if everything goes perfectly, tomorrow morning we might be able to do that. And you know, it's during the week. It's not like I'd given anybody any prior warning. And on top of that, Doyle didn't really want everybody. He didn't want a wide information base out there that anybody would know about. It was kind of a special move, right? And I said, "What time you want to leave?" He said, "I want to be on the turntable by 5 o'clock." I'm going, okay. It's an all-nighter, which you already knew, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So sign me up. I'll be, you know. So, you know, be honest with you, when I left the base, I'm going, you know, this is a tall effing order to be able to do this. Can we get this done? And Mac's he's got to go get rested. And I did get a couple of young guys that we had with us. They participated until I think they gave up at about 3 a.m. and headed home. But I can honestly say that morning, you know, it's you know, middle of the night. You're there with you got a 484, and there's nobody else responsible. Nobody. And Mac rolled in the door. The air pumps were on. You know, we're ready to back out of the Roundhouse. You know, he threw his stuff up in the cab, and I pulled the chains. We got backed out onto the turntable and lined for the departure. And I went back to the Roundhouse, shut the lights off, closed the doors, and went out and got on the locomotive, and we left. And I'm going, you know, that the big trips with the big passenger train were always important, and I've got special memories from every one of those trips. Some were harder than others, right? You know, that story that I gave you there was that was only good for maybe my own personal accomplishment, to be able to say, if you want to try something, give this a shot sometime. You need to know a few things before you get there, obviously. So Doyle must have trained me well enough to end up getting that much done, and we got the locomotive where we needed to go that day.
Yeah, that's great.
You know, other trips in particular, the Montana trips, Michigan, right? You know, there were segments because, you know, you got to see, you know, if you weren't firing, you were servicing, and you know, I think we left Missoula westbound coming on. That would have been the trip in, I believe, 2004. We came up out of Missoula, and you know, the NP had a couple of different routes out of Dodge. But anyway, Bill Stetler was the engineer, so when we came out of Missoula, I mean, well, heavy train. We did end up having. We did end up having a helper, an MRL helper on with us, but we were working the locomotive hard, and it's one of the few times where I had the feed water pump and the injector on all at the same time, which in big steam that doesn't happen much.
Right.
And working hard uphill, and it was a great time. You get to see the machine do things that you normally don't get to see.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that may be the biggest thing with the museum is you have the locomotive here. If you see it here cold with no steam in it, you need to see this engine do what it does.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen it at 60, then you haven't seen everything you need to see.
Yeah.
And when I looked at that question, I said, yeah, there's so many things I could say.
Yeah. And I really liked what you said starting off with that is every trip you get, appreciate it. And that's one thing when I came into this business is I had Gary Bensman, steam mechanic from the East on the 765. One thing he told me, treat every trip like it's your last because you never know when it's going to be. And that's just something that stuck out with me, and I'm glad that you mentioned something similar to that.
That was a common commodity for us. And when I say that comment, I mean, I can think of, I used to get into a bad mood in the last few hours into Brooklyn, right? And what that was I didn't want it to be over,
mm-hmm.
right? And, you're going, oh, I don't know. And when you pull the, you pull the fire and you get everything shut down and everything goes quiet and you go, standing there at that second, I couldn't have told you when the next trip was going to be.
Yeah.
Right. But they kept happening, and that it was a truism. It wasn't anybody trying to be dramatic in the steam program. It's if you get out, you're lucky, and you can't expect it just to happen.
Yeah.
Right?
So what's been the most fulfilling part of working on the daylight for you?
I mean, I would venture a guess that it's a accomplishment of being on the crew, knowing the machine, and sooner or later you become more responsible than you thought you were ever going to be. And I think the accomplishment is that I don't try and be. I mean, most people that know me, I'm not driven by ego. And, if you put this out in a podcast, it's like, wow, guys, I can tell you, I'm not. I'll talk to everybody.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? And I'm looking at it with the idea I'm lucky to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And in the job that I had, I told people, I said, if you get a ride in the cab of this thing, you stand a better chance on getting a ride in the cab on this thing on the main line than you do, or you stand a better chance of flying in the backseat of a jet fighter than you do riding in the cab of this 484 down the main line.
Mm-hmm.
Because just by demand, the demand, supply and demand piece that's out there, you go, I plug people in the back of a jet fighter on a routine basis. That happens plenty. Big 484s on the main line doesn't happen much. So
yeah.
If you get there, you've been pretty lucky.
Yeah.
And with people that come in, or even on the road, I guess that you met a lot of people. With the engine, you're trying to be the ambassador for that locomotive. All right. I've seen some examples of other crew members that I'd like to take to the woodshed about some things I thought, that is not the way you perform. But that's just me.
Yeah.
Right? And everybody's a little different. And today, the crew that we've got that works on it today, everybody's tight-knit, been around. But we're all older. Right? And the younger crowd, do I see a younger crowd out there? I do. Right? I know them. I know particular people by name that I could put out their first and last name here right now with Zach and say, these are the guys I think are going to be the follow-ons here at Portland. That people that I would look at reliably to come back and be part of this program. Dale, or if we look at age on the crew, everybody will age out. Every one of us. I'm turning the big 7-0 this year, right? I don't talk about it until Zach shows up, and does this, and I, max 80. Everybody else in the crew is in the 70 and above program now. It is, we get to a point where we need younger guys. There's a couple in here in the Idgeon house. Luke Johnson's here today. Luke's been around this Idgeon for a long time. My son, Bill Stetler, who will retire from Amtrak at some point here coming up, and was basically Doyle's other go-to engineer to begin with. Mike Manueller over at Heber's got a relationship with us, and obviously, did I say Justin?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So, and Dan Volker down in Texas, and all dedicated steam personalities. Okay. So, do I see a future here? I do.
So one thing that's really cool for me is you all maintain the 49 in the Brooklyn Roundhouse, the Southern Pacific Roundhouse. What was that like working in there? I'm sure it was a little sentimental, history, but also what were the conditions like working there? And then how did that transform into ORHF and the facility we're in now?
So Brooklyn is the roundhouse at Brooklyn, like a lot of other old roundhouses, right? You had to look at the history. There's some roundhouses that were, and how they were built, a lot of brick roundhouses around the country. At Portland, the Southern Pacific had what we called the original roundhouse. Was brick, standard brick roundhouse, but it didn't have doors on it, so it just had bays. That must be a lot of the SP roundhouses, were open down in California, right? And didn't have doors. So up here, that was the same with the original roundhouse. In 1941, they built. It's 40-41. They built the. What was called the new house at Brooklyn. And the reason they did that is they were getting bigger power in. And with the war coming on, they needed additional capacity. So they built a wood, all wood roundhouse there in addition to the original roundhouse. So, and we survived in the original roundhouse until we moved over here in 2012. So from 1980 to 2012, right? And the structure was built. It wasn't built to be permanent, right? Exterior, I have to laugh. The exterior construction is, was wood frame, and then they had what looked like corrugated metal panels on the outside, and they weren't corrugated metal panels, they were corrugated asbestos panels. But that might give you some clue as to why it was never going to be public museum type of an arrangement, right? So it was cold. It was drafty. It had the lighting on the inside. It was like maintaining a steam locomotive in a cave, to some degree, right? It was always dark, even with the lights on.
Yeah.
And the windows probably could have been better if you could wash that many windows. But you never had as much light as you'd like. It was just kind of a dark place. It had its own mystique, right? It's like a 15th century castle, right? But when you live in the facility, you were pretty familiar with where all the tripping hazards were, and when we're trying to pack more stuff into a 4-stall roundhouse than you can possibly need, it got to be tough. When we first ended up over there, it was just the 49 and 1 stall, and the other 3 tracks were still dedicated to SP.
Okay.
They had a full-time roundhouse foreman at Brooklyn at that time, and they had one on, and they had their primary, and then they had the other shift guys. So you always had a roundhouse foreman 24/7 there at Brooklyn when we were there early. Had the refueling racks for power coming in, and the team tracks, machine tracks. We called them the machine tracks that were once part of what had been the back shop over there. And, all the SP power that was working the valley and would terminate up here, because this was the end of SP up here in Portland. A lot of power got turned at Brooklyn. So we were doing our thing in a roundhouse that was still doing the job for the railroad. And as the years went by, with how that changed a bit is as you approach 1996, with the big SP-UP merger, that was going to change Brooklyn entirely again. But so you'd roll down there on a Sunday. I did lots of Saturday, Sunday work with a regular Monday through Friday job I had to. Right? And we also used to do a lot of night work, after, it come down to get, when you needed to be ready, you had to find a way to get the hours in. So Brooklyn, on a Sunday morning, you'd pull into the roundhouse facility there, and I should have taken a lot more pictures, but about every SD9 that Southern Pacific still had was parked at Brooklyn on a Sunday morning, because all of the power that they used on all the valley trains that were working local work were all there to get fueled, serviced, and turned for the next week. And you'd pull in, and Brooklyn was always a challenge, and you'd get there, you'd get inside, you go, okay, we get the lights on, and go over and check with the roundhouse foreman and see if occasionally if we had the compressor down at one point, and the roundhouse foreman at the time, I rolled in that morning. I said, "Hey Bob, I need air." He said, "I'll go out and start that SD9 out there." And okay, you bet.
Yep.
Anyway, we go out and we get it going, and that's shop air. So in Brooklyn was when you were inside, it had. Its history started in the 40s, and you're there in the 80s and 90s, 2000s, and you go, it's a relic. Mm-hmm. It is really a relic. There's some windows are out, like almost all roundhouses. There's always some kid that's got to put a rock through a window on a roundhouse, right? But everything that went on there were respected. Right? It saw a lot of people. It saw the decline of steam power in its day, and it existed long after what it was built to do was forgotten on the railroad. Turntable sitting out there. We got a steam engine. It's handy to have a turntable, and it was at that point it was SP roundhouse and in an SP yard, and in '96 UP with the merger the roundhouse foreman went away, fueling racks on inbound outbound went away. Inbound outbound leads were still there, but they took the fueling out, and Brooklyn started another decline. The roundhouse facility started another decline at that point, and we'd done everything we could, patch and rough, you name it, and you're just trying to keep the lights on is what you were trying to do, and you were running out of time, and you knew it. So we knew it in '96 when the merger happened. And we wondered at that time whether, how Union Pacific would handle the new merged railroad. And there were all kinds of rumors, Brooklyn Yard's going to go away. Well, here we are in 2025, and Brooklyn's still, as usual over there, and better, right? And where the roundhouse was is now a lot of pavement, which we knew that's where UP wanted to go because they wanted to expand intermodal at Brooklyn. And we started Oregon Rail Heritage Foundation, and we were talking about that this morning. The concept of that started in the '90s, late '90s probably. There were a couple people that on a nice sunny summer day walked in the roundhouse over there, and it was Phil Barney and Laurel Lyon. And Laurel was she was really became the impetus of what ORHF became. All right, so they walked in, never been there, didn't realize they lived in the neighborhood and walked back there. And they walked through the door, and you got these steam engines in there, and they didn't know that. And they're like, look at this. And both of them, their eyes are about that big. It's like, is this real? Yeah, touch them, they're real.
Yeah.
Right? But ORHF became we knew we needed to have a plan to get out of Brooklyn. Something had to happen with the locomotives. Now at this point, the one thing I leave out is the 49 shows up there in 1980. The 700 comes out of the park about 1986, and comes to Brooklyn naturally. 1996, the 197, or what was at that point Union Pacific 3203, waiting to be 197 or an N197, it comes up in 96, and now you got all three of them in there. And Doyle, because he never had enough to do, he would occasionally pop in with an F7, or an F45, or wrecked BCR unit that was going to become the internal organs for the PA and the PA, all of those, so we saw all those different projects in there. And Sumter Valley 18, that locomotive spoiler was rebuilt at Brooklyn. CP 2816's boiler was rebuilt at Brooklyn. We used Doyle's F7 and a couple of passenger cars and a bulkhead flat to take it back up to Vancouver on this special move. When it's like all the things that we got to do, I'm like, I have to pinch myself sometimes and going, how the hell did you do that? And I'm going, don't ask me. I have no idea how we did this, but we did. You know, and all that happened out of Brooklyn. There were a lot of things that went on. A lot of it may have had to do with the decade. That as the decades have changed, this era that we're in right now is not necessarily easier to. It's not easier to do things, but at Brooklyn, it all boiled into this is what happened. The locomotives survived there. ORHF and the concept went from a coffee shop, went over and had this meeting at a coffee shop in the Brooklyn neighborhood in southeast Portland here, and those meetings turned into it took years, but it started bigger meetings once a month, and then money was started to work, donation funding for the new ORHF engine house. ORHF bought a chunk of property over here near where we're at, but if you and I were out on the ground, it's not where we're sitting here right now. That's not the ground that ORHF purchased. ORHF initially bought a rectangle that, if we looked to the north here, you'd see the piers for the Portland City streetcar bridge, and that property was basically in that footprint.
Okay.
All right. It was, and what happened with this is the city wanted to put in light rail and the streetcar line that the TriMet wanted to buy that piece of property. So they traded ORHF. That property, they got that property, they gave us this. And when I say gave, this is, it's on like a 99-year lease.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
And for anybody that hasn't been here, the facility, the property is basically surrounded by rail. Right? So, Oregon Pacific on one side, Union Pacific on the other, and the Portland Light Rail on the other side. So it's roughly a triangle with tracks on all legs of the triangle. And in the middle is perfect place for a rail museum. So, the inception of ORHF, and the footprint of the building and the property initial build was about $5 million. The city of Portland paid. They didn't pay for that. We were at about the approximately 4 million mark on donation. Now we had some big donations from a couple of people, one of them being Gordon Zimmerman, who was an old daylight guy. All right, Gordon's side of that wasn't really in the locomotive as much as it was in concessions. And Gordon had came from a wealthy family, had property in California and down the valley, and Gordon put up a large amount of money to build Oregon Rail Heritage Foundation, or the engine house. And they were at about the $4 million mark, and the city provided a $1 million cap loan to get the construction done. And the construction was that loan, again, the city didn't give it to you. You had, it was supposed to be paid back to the city. That was the deal. And they were going to be pretty easy with it, which makes me wonder whether they ever expected that they were going to get paid back or not. But as it turns out, because of Holiday Express, the city cap loan was paid off in 3 years.
Wow.
So, when we did Holiday Express, had enough to fund the engine house for the following year, and still put money back at the city for the for what they had provided. And I don't think that the city of Portland ever really is, that this isn't a city-run operation, even though the locomotives are owned by the city. Mm-hmm. We don't get a dollar of city money here to do this, what we do here. And we fall under Portland Parks Department because the city had to figure out, well, how do we handle this? So they put us under parks, and from the volunteer side, this is not the typical Portland Parks Department volunteer program, and they don't try and operate us, and yet we're a successful entity here. So we're not having to go back to the city to say, hey, we need help keeping our lights on here. Mm-hmm. The locomotives and the equipment is doing that, and the people are doing it all by themselves. And like any rail museum, if it's operating, it takes a lot of people, committed people, to do that. So, and we're fortunate to end up having some really, we've got some really good people. We'd like to keep that going.
Hey, this is a tough question, and working on a large mainline locomotive myself, we deal with this question a lot. And we kind of talked about a little bit earlier that mainline operations are peaks and valleys. What do you see in the 4449's future here at ORHF and moving forward?
The future, at ORHF, the facility-wise, everything it just continues to become better, all right? Turntable is in, and we lived through that project, which that's another one. If everybody should have to overhaul a turntable and get it in the ground someplace, because you're going to, it's an adventure at every step. Our relationship with Rick Franklin and, Albany and Eastern Railroad and the Rick Franklin Corporation. Rick is the heavy lift that we need in order to, good to know the right people.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
And Rick's passionate about this museum, especially as it serves kids, young people, right? Because he runs Holiday Express, it's Holiday Express is for the kids, even though, kids may be defined from, 7 to 70, I don't know, or younger. In that case, I started Justin pretty young, so at Brooklyn, but and look what he's doing. So I think that the future, what will happen here is locomotives. It's an operating museum. I think the push is always going to be that we've got power that can be fired up, all right? Running the trains on the OPR main line out here down to Oaks Park and back. That's another phase we're going through. So 2 years ago, it's the turntable. Now we're working on buying the Oregon Pacific Railroad, this portion of it, the Milwaukee section of the Oregon Pacific Railroad. And you go, why would you want to do that? Because your ability for this place to do what it does, to be able to run an excursion train from here down to the Oaks Park and back up here for Holiday Express at the very least, gives you the ability to have a rail program that people can get on and ride. We would like to be able to get out of the house here and run passenger excursions with the big engines. I think that that's a possibility too. I'm not going to look at this and go, we can't do that anymore. I think it depends on, who's in charge of what at what time. And in this case, when Amtrak pulled the ability to run excursions, that was 2018, and I think there is room in there to continue doing that. I think everybody in the industry has to find out what it's going to cost to make that happen. Then that drives the other piece. PTC is well, would I put PTC in these locomotives? If you're going to be on the main line, you have to.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's going to be what it takes to keep them going, we'll probably get the funding to do that. There's all kinds of questions about that, and I'm pretty familiar with PTC installation at this point between Calgary and and Cheyenne. I don't see us doing the installation that 2816 did for PTC. I think it would be more the LEAP system, with the trailing unit being the holding, and we'll adapt to that. And we've got enough friends out there that are willing to help out.
Yeah.
Right? Ed Dickens has been upfront about saying, "I'll help," and he's been here numerous times. We just need to be able to go, I need help.
Yeah.
Same thing with CP, or at this point CPKC. I got to get it right. So, and so I think ORHF, as far as possibilities, our footprint here is about maxed out as far as equipment, right? So when I say maxed out, it's we've got more than enough to keep us busy, and adding to it is I would think infrastructure will be next. So it's railroad, followed by some type of a car maintenance facility, all right? And I've been a big proponent of that at ORHF, that you have to have a place to put a passenger car. Because all of our passenger cars are old and need to be maintained. And you're never going to be able to get in the front door with a passenger car when you've got this many steam locomotives in the engine house. So its next phase is, how do you maintain what I would consider, what is the bread and butter of the museum? The steam engine is the crown jewel, but the bread and butter is the passenger cars, all right? And the quality of the passenger fleet is got to be that'll have to become a big issue. It is for anybody. It's a challenge for every organization that does this, and there's a lot of places in the country that are for-profit rail operations, tourist rail operations. This is a non-profit museum. There are those of us out there like that too. we need to come up with a follow-on plan for how we're going to handle our cars.
All right, can you tell our listeners and viewers how they can support the 4449 and ORHF all together?
So what I'd encourage almost anybody, if you're looking, there are a lot of times, as president of the Friends, that we'll have people that will say, well, I sent money, I donated money for you, but it went to ORHF. I said, okay, that's good. And they're thinking that they just donate to the daylight. There's two ways you can do that. You can, the Friends of 4449, if you go into the website and go www.4449.com, all right, you're going to get to our website.
Okay.
So in my with that, the Friends are a 501c3 nonprofit, just like Oregon Rail Heritage Foundation is. Currently, if you donate to ORHF or you donate to the Friends, both work. All right. If you're donating to the Friends, it's going to go to the 4449 or the cars. That's the revenue path. The Friends of 4449 has a bank account. We maintain independent as much as possible away from having to, we don't just rely on funding from ORHF, all right? And all the locomotive groups in here have been that way. I mean, that's the other one that most people, when they show up here, they think, okay, one overall hierarchy. And instead you've got a 700 under a locomotive management group, 49 under a locomotive management group, 197 under a locomotive management group. And I think that Rick would like to change that. We're not really sure today on how all that works. But if you're donating to either of those two entities, you're getting it to the right place. ORF it benefits the 4449. We're not leaving ORF, right? We're permanently here along with everybody else. And all of those avenues I'd encourage. Okay.
And we'll put up links for the 4449 donation link, and then we'll put one up for ORF as well, and
okay.
Let people kind of decide how they want to do it. And like we all know in this, it takes donations to keep this stuff going. Any bit helps. Big donations help more, but any bit helps.
When it comes to donations, like any of the rail groups, we've got 2 passenger cars in that are right now stored at down in Lebanon, Oregon, at the RFC facility, Albany and Eastern facility down there. One is a Shasta Daylight coach. The other one is what had been a Canadian National Diner, and both of them, the friends purchased the Shasta coach, and the diner was donated by Heber Valley Railroad. And both of them are undergoing work. The diner is our primary, we're working on that big time down there, and the reason for that is they can get it undercover. They've got a big tent facility down there. I've got the car in, getting body work done, windows, stuff like that. And those cars, that job is being, that was an Emory Rail Heritage Trust grant to us to do that. That would be the second big Emory donation that we've gotten, grant donation we've gotten. We need all the help we can get in order to do what we're doing. All right, just locomotives take effort, and so do the cars. So,
all right, to finish up our episode, is there anything else you'd like to add, or any other thoughts or comments you'd want to finish up with?
Well, I tell you what, having you and your family out here, this has been a good deal. I realize your involvement with 611. It's pretty easy to have you here. I would anticipate having you back at any time. I'd consider you to be in the same program that I'm in. And on top of that, a pretty nice guy. So at this point, I'd take you back out here anytime if you want to move west. I hope facility-wise, I'll be curious to see how you push this out to the rest of the rail community. And I appreciate your time here, Zach.
Yeah, and I want to say personally, this is one of the most phenomenal facilities I've seen. Restoration shop, displays, exhibits, the turntable, everything, top notch. You all are doing an amazing job out here. Can't thank you all enough for rolling the red carpet up for us here. And, we love it out here, and strongly want to encourage all of our listeners, viewers, come out here to Portland, come to ORF, check out the facility, buy tickets to Ride Holiday Express, support this group, all the locomotives out here. Couldn't ask for a better group of people out here.
And check the websites. That's a big deal. If I'd love to get word out when we actually get to do something. The goal here in 2025 is we'll have the 49, we'll have an annual done on it here in the next couple months, and we'll come May 10th, we'll end up having 4449 fired up on the facility.
Wow. Okay. All right, so May 10th, everyone come out here to ORHF and see the daylight under steam.
Right. Now I got to go to work.
There you go. Well, thank you, Pat, again for everything. We appreciate all you've done for us out here, and can't thank you all enough. Thank the crew. Thank all the staff here for us. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Steaming Along the Line with Pat Tracy and the Southern Pacific Daylight 4449. Again, for more information on the 4449, check out their website, www.4449.com. You can donate there directly to the Locomotive. Also, for more information on the Oregon Rail Heritage Foundation, www.orhf.org, where you can donate to ORHF in Portland, Oregon. If you like this episode of Steaming Along the Line, please follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Spotify. We plan on having more episodes coming out this year with other individuals involved with steam locomotives across the United States, spreading the history of steam to a new generation. And you can also follow our website, www.steamingalongtheline.com.